An 11-year-old black kid from a cramped rental walks in, saying his dad's a four-star general. To Ms. Patricia Ellison, that's the most absurd thing she's heard in more than 2 decades of teaching. She doesn't murmur it, either. She declares it to the whole 5th grade class at Jefferson Elementary, then yanks Malik Carter's neatly written paper from his desk and tears it straight down the middle. The RIP seems to boom. She shreds it again. Bits of paper flutter onto Malik's scuffed sneakers like ashes. You don't get to spin fairy tales about being important, Malik, she snaps. Real generals live in big houses. Their kids go to fancy private schools. Their families drive brand new cars. Her gaze slides over him, icy and appraising. They definitely don't show up looking like this. 11-year-old Malik stands rooted in place, hands trembling. Every kid in the room locks onto him, some curious, some amused, some uncomfortable. Ms. Ellison crushes the scraps and drops them into the trash can. Pitiful, she mutters. Have you ever stood there and watched an educator dismantle a child's spirit for being black and honest at the same time? 2 hours earlier, none of this had happened yet. 2 hours earlier, Malik woke up to his father's voice drifting up the hallway, warm and commanding. Roll call in 5, soldier. Breakfast is getting cold. The Carter family squeezed themselves into a worn 3-bedroom apartment in Arlington, Virginia, close enough to Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall that the morning bugle sometimes slipped through cracked windows. The place was spotless, but obviously lived in. The sofa cushions sagged, the dining chairs didn't match, and the carpet had a stubborn stain they never quite got out. Framed photos lined the walls, birthday parties, graduations, Malik as a toddler on his dad's shoulders, but nothing screamed high-ranking officer. No pressed uniforms on display, no shadow boxes of medals, no framed flags or plaques. That was by design. General Marcus Carter didn't advertise who he was. Operational security, he always said. The fewer people knew, the better. Malik shuffled into the kitchen and found his father at the table in sweatpants and a faded Howard University hoodie, coffee mug in hand. To anybody glancing through the window, he could have passed for a high school coach or a mid-level office worker. Malik's mother, Dr. Renee Carter, moved briskly between counter and sink in green hospital scrubs, hair pulled back for surgery at Walter Reed. On the fridge, a crayon drawing showed a stick-figure soldier with 4 stars crammed onto each shoulder. Beside it hung a calendar, today's date circled in thick red marker. Career Day, Parents' Visit. Malik's grin stretched so wide his cheeks hurt. He'd been counting down to this Friday like it was Christmas. "Dad, can I tell them about when you met the president?" he blurted, practically vibrating. General Carter glanced at Renee, searching her face. She gave him a familiar look, the one that said their son shouldn't have to live entirely in the shadows for the sake of classified briefings and threat matrices. "Malik, what did we talk about?" his father asked gently. "Some things stay in the vault for security reasons." Malik frowned. "But everybody else gets to brag about their parents," he protested. "I know, kiddo," Marcus replied, voice soft but unyielding. "Our situation's different. We keep a low profile, remember?" Malik nodded, but the truth only half settled. Why did other kids get to beam with pride while he had to pretend his father was just another nameless bureaucrat? Renee squeezed Marcus's hand. "He deserves to be proud of you." "I know," Marcus murmured, eyes lingering on his son. "Just keep it simple today, all right? You don't need to prove anything to anybody." Malik shoveled the last spoonful of cereal into his mouth, still buzzing with excitement, and jogged upstairs to throw on his school clothes. He had no idea that in less than half a day, the word simple would stop applying to anything. Jefferson Elementary sat in the middle of Arlington, a school that officially bragged about serving everyone equally, at least on paper and in brochures. Military kids whose parents rotated in and out with every duty station sat next to children of foreign diplomats stationed at embassies. Refugee families trying to build new lives shared hallways with kids whose parents drafted policy in downtown offices. Custodians' children, restaurant workers' children, and high-ranking staffers' children all technically belonged to the same school community. That was the theory. In reality, Ms. Ellison had spent 23 years building her own mental categories about which families mattered and which ones didn't, which stories were credible. Her classroom walls carried an American flag and framed photos of her shaking hands with city council members and school board representatives. Certificates of outstanding instruction fanned across a bulletin board. A tiny enamel flag pin stayed permanently fastened to her cardigan. Despite all the patriotic symbolism, she'd never worn a uniform, never lived on base housing, never left the country except for vacations. Still, she was absolutely certain she knew what a general's family looked like. Malik Carter, in his hand-me-down hoodie and frayed backpack, did not qualify. During the morning announcements, Principal Monroe's voice crackled through the ceiling speakers. "Good morning, Tigers. Today is our annual Parent Career Day. We're excited to host visitors from many professions. Please remember to be respectful and attentive." In room 205, the energy lifted instantly. Ryan Miller, a white classmate whose father lobbied on Capitol Hill, shot his hand into the air. "Ms. Ellison, my dad's got meetings with 3 senators this week about the transportation bill," he said proudly, shoulders straightening. The teacher's eyes lit up with open admiration. "How wonderful, Ryan," she said. "Public policy is essential to our democracy." A few desks over, Jasmine Lopez, a Latina girl whose mother worked nights cleaning federal office buildings, nervously raised her hand. "My mom works there too," she said. "She cleans the offices after everybody goes home." "That's nice, Jasmine," Ms. Ellison replied. Her smile thinned, never quite reaching her eyes. "All right, class, let's open our social studies books to page 42. Malik watched the small exchange, feeling something old and familiar stir inside his chest. He'd seen that script too many times. Some kids' parents got described as public servants and leaders, while others were quietly shuffled into the support staff category, no matter how hard they worked. The praise usually tracked with bank accounts and job titles. At 10 o'clock, Ms. Ellison handed out lined paper. "Okay, everyone," she announced, voice bright. "Before our guests join us, I want you to write 3 paragraphs about your parents' careers. What do they do? Why does it matter? How does it help our community?" She walked between the desks, tapping knuckles and straightening papers. "These will be read aloud, so give me your best handwriting and careful thought." Pens and pencils started scratching. Malik pulled out his mechanical pencil and wrote in careful, blocky letters. "My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for 32 years in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and South Korea. He helps make important decisions that keep people safe." The words made his pulse race with quiet pride. "Sajid Del Sawan, Azit Feichi Fernonson, Edit." There are only a small number of four-star generals in the whole armed forces, Malik continued. My dad started as a second lieutenant and earned every promotion. He says being a leader means serving others first, not yourself. My dad has been deployed 6 times. Sometimes I don't see him for months, but he goes because he loves this country. That's why his job matters. His friend Andre King, sitting nearby, leaned over. For real? Your dad's a general? Andre whispered, eyes wide. Malik nodded, voice dropping. Yeah, he just doesn't brag about it. Classified and all that. Andre huffed a quiet laugh. Man, my dad just fixes cars at the shop. Malik shook his head. My dad says every job counts. Your dad keeps cars working so families don't crash. That's important too. Andre grinned at that. A dark shadow suddenly fell over Malik's desk. Ms. Ellison loomed beside him, bending to read his paper. Her lips flattened into a hard line, suspicion flashing in her eyes. Malik felt his stomach twist. There was something in her expression, a mix of disbelief and irritation that told him she didn't buy a single sentence. She said nothing. Not yet. She simply straightened, walked calmly back to her desk, and jotted something in her planner with brisk strokes. As the morning crept forward, Malik's backpack buzzed softly against his chair. The school allowed students to carry basic phones for emergencies. His was an old smartphone his parents insisted on for check-ins and last-minute base updates. On the next bathroom break, Malik slipped into the hallway and checked the screen. A text from his mom glowed. Dad caught an earlier flight from Korea, landing at Reagan 3 p.m. today. He'll be there for Career Day. Keep it a surprise. Malik's heart practically launched into orbit. His father had been in Korea for 3 weeks, attending planning meetings Malik wasn't allowed to ask about. Now he was coming home early just to be in Malik's classroom. Malik wanted to sprint down the hallway, screaming. Instead, he shoved the phone back into his pocket and headed for the sink, trying to play it cool. He didn't notice Ms. Ellison watching from across the room when he slipped back inside, face shining with barely contained excitement. He didn't see the way her eyes narrowed as she mentally connected his mysterious grin, his buzzing phone, and that fantastical essay about a 4-star general. In her mind, the pattern was obvious. That boy was building a lie. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd correct it publicly. What she didn't realize was that less than 24 hours later, a real 4-star general would step through her door and overturn everything she thought she knew about Malik Carter. The following morning, Jefferson Elementary thrummed with unusual energy. By 8:30, parents were filing into room 205. A defense attorney in a sleek navy suit, an architect clutching rolled-up blueprints, a software engineer, a restaurant chef in spotless jacket, a tired nurse still in wrinkled scrubs from the night shift. Adults squeezed into kid-sized chairs. Ms. Ellison greeted each visitor with noticeably different warmth. The attorney got a firm handshake and sparkling smile. The architect received enthusiastic questions about blueprints. The chef earned a polite nod. The nurse heard a brisk, "Thank you for your service," before Ms. Ellison turned away to line chairs against the back wall. Malik sat at his desk near the middle row, sneaking glances at his phone whenever he dared. A text from earlier that morning glowed in his memory like a secret weapon. Wheels down, grabbing a quick nap. See you at school around 10. Proud of you, soldier, his dad had written at 6 a.m. 2 more hours, Malik told himself. 2 more hours and his father would walk through the door and everyone would see. Class, Ms. Ellison clapped twice. Before our guests share about their work, I'd like you to read those paragraphs you wrote yesterday. Our visitors should hear how thoughtfully you described their contributions. One by one, students rose from their seats. Ryan Miller went first, describing his father's lobbying firm and how they helped shape important legislation. Ms. Ellison's smile practically glowed. "What an excellent example of civic engagement," she said. Then Jasmine read about her mother's cleaning job and how she took pride in leaving offices spotless. "Very good," Ms. Ellison replied briskly before quickly moving on. "Next, please." Finally, Malik heard his name. "Malik Carter, you're uppy," she said. Malik stood, paper trembling slightly in his hands. He cleared his throat, chest tight. "My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army," he began. "He has served for 32 years in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. He helps make important decisions that keep America safe." Ms. Ellison's expression shifted instantly, something sharp passing over her features. "There are only a few 4-star generals in the entire military," Malik continued. "My dad started as a second lieutenant. He says leadership is about serving others, not yourself. He's been deployed 6 times, sometimes for months. He does it because he loves our country," Malik read, voice gaining confidence. "That's why—" "Stop!" Ms. Ellison snapped. The word cracked through the classroom like a slammed locker door. Chairs squeaked. The visiting parents looked up from their phones and program handouts. Ms. Ellison rose from behind her desk, smoothing her cardigan. "Malik, come to the front of the room, please." Malik's legs felt rubbery, but he obeyed, walking between desks under a forest of eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Class," Ms. Ellison announced, adopting her lecture voice. "This is an excellent example of something we call embellishment." She folded her arms. "Malik, I need you to be honest with everyone. What does your father really do?" Malik swallowed. He is a general, ma'am," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Malik, I've been teaching for 23 years. I've met generals. I've taught their children. Generals do not live in modest rental apartments. Their children don't attend underfunded public schools in worn-out sneakers," she added pointedly. "Their families are prominent in the community. They appear in society pages, attend galas, receive awards. There are records." Malik felt his face burn hot. "But ma'am, my dad keeps a low profile because—" "Because what?" she cut in, sarcasm dripping. "Secret missions?" A few students snickered nervously. Ryan lifted his hand. "Maybe his dad really is." "Ryan, I appreciate your empathy," Ms. Ellison said smoothly, "but this is a teachable moment." She turned back to Malik, voice sharpening. "I checked with the office yesterday. There is no General Carter listed anywhere in our parent records," she went on. "Your father's occupation is listed as government employee. That's very different from 4-star general, isn't it?" Malik's eyes filled with tears. He tried desperately to blink away. "He writes that for security," Malik whispered. "He told me—" "Enough," she snapped, raising her voice. The room jolted. "You will sit down right now, rewrite this assignment with the truth, and apologize to your classmates and our guests for wasting their time. Do you understand?" Tears finally spilled, hot streaks on Malik's cheeks, but he stayed rooted in place. "Malik, I said sit down," she barked. "My father didn't raise a liar, ma'am," he whispered. The room went dead silent. Ryan's mom shifted in her chair. Several parents looked suddenly fascinated by the floor tiles. "What did you just say to me?" Ms. Ellison's face flushed red. "My dad is a general," Malik repeated. "Louder now." He flew back from Korea. He'll be here at 10. You'll see. Ms. Ellison's jaw clenched so hard a tendon jumped in her neck. To the principal's office. Now, she ordered. Andre shot to his feet. But Ms. Ellison, he's not lying. I've seen. Andre, sit down before you join him, she snapped. Andre sank into his seat, cheeks burning, giving Malik an apologetic look. Malik grabbed his backpack, throat aching. As he moved toward the door, Ms. Ellison delivered one last, cutting pronouncement, loud enough for every adult in the room. Let this be a lesson, class. Honesty and humility are values we cherish here. Making yourself sound more important than you are, especially when you come from certain backgrounds, is the opposite of character. Malik froze at the threshold, fingers clenched around his backpack straps until his knuckles whitened. Every eye followed him, watching him leave under a cloud of humiliation. He had roughly 90 minutes until his father's scheduled arrival. 90 minutes to exist as the kid who publicly got called a liar. He didn't yet know Ms. Ellison's day was about to implode. The hallway seemed to stretch twice its usual length. Malik's footsteps squeaked against the shiny floor, echoing too loudly in his ears. Behind him, he could still faintly hear Ms. Ellison's cheerful voice pivoting back to career day, as though she hadn't just ripped him apart in front of his peers. Through the main office window, Malik spotted Principal Monroe on the phone, her expression serious. She glanced at a manila folder, then looked up and caught sight of Malik. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Concern? He couldn't tell. She was mid-conversation, so she simply gave him a small nod before turning back to her call. Malik wondered if Ms. Ellison had already messaged the office with her story about his disruption. Instead of Monroe, Assistant Principal Blake handled the meeting. He was a white man in his 50s, khakis and a polo with the school mascot embroidered on the chest. His resting face always seemed halfway between boredom and disappointment. "Have a seat, Malik," he said, opening a folder. Malik sank into a chair that felt too big and too hard at the same time, his sneakers dangling an inch from the floor. So, Blake began, scanning the paper. "Ms. Ellison reports that you disrupted class and refused to correct inaccurate information in your assignment." "Sir, it's not inaccurate," Malik said, voice shaking. "My dad really is." Blake held up a hand. "Malik, I pulled your student file. Your father, Marcus Carter, lists his occupation as government. That's what's in our database. That's what we have. That's what he writes on forms for security," Malik insisted. "He's not allowed to." Blake chuckled under his breath, not cruelly, just with the dismissive amusement adults sometimes reserve for kids' imaginations. "Listen, Malik, I understand wanting your dad to sound important. Many kids do that. But spinning elaborate stories about generals and classified missions?" He shook his head. "That crosses a line." "I'm not making it up," Malik protested, voice rising without his permission. Blake's expression hardened. "Lower your voice. You're already in trouble." "Don't escalate it," Blake added. Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, heartbeat thudding. A new text from Dad lit the screen. "Running late. Pentagon briefing got bumped earlier. I'll be there around 10:30. Sit tight." Malik's chest flooded with relief. He thrust the phone toward Blake. "See? He's coming. He'll be here in less than an hour." Blake barely skimmed the message. "Malik, I can't verify anything from a text," he said. "You could label any contact Dad. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to rejoin your class. You're going to apologize to Ms. Ellison for being disrespectful. Then you're going to rewrite that essay with accurate information. After that, we move forward. Understood?" Malik's hands started to tremble. "So you don't believe me either," he said. Blake sighed. "I believe you're craving attention. Kids in difficult situations sometimes do that. Single-parent households, parents working multiple jobs. It happens. They create stories to feel special." "My parents are married," Malik said sharply. "My mom's a surgeon at Walter Reed. My dad—" "Enough," Blake snapped, standing. "Return to class now, or I'll schedule a formal disciplinary conference with your parents. Trust me, you don't want that following you." Malik rose stiffly, vision swimming. "My father has been deployed 6 times, sir," he whispered. "He's risked his life for this country. He deserves to be believed." For a second, Blake's shoulders relaxed, something almost like sympathy entering his eyes. It vanished quickly. "Back to class, Malik." Malik walked out, heart heavy but fused with a thin line of steel. When he stepped back into room 2E, the atmosphere had shifted. The back and sides of the classroom were lined with chairs now, every seat holding a parent or guardian. Career Day had kicked fully into gear. Ms. Ellison stood near the whiteboard, introducing Ryan's father. "We're so grateful to have such accomplished guests with us today," she gushed. "Mr. Miller works with some of the most influential lawmakers in Washington. Let's give him our full attention." Applause rippled across the room as he started speaking. Malik slipped into his seat, trying to make himself small. Andre leaned over. "You all right, man?" he whispered. Before Malik could answer, Ms. Ellison spoke up, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Malik, do you have something to share with the class?" Every head turned. Parents, kids, even the guest speakers looked his way. Malik swallowed. "Ma'am?" he asked. "Your apology," she said briskly. Malik's stomach plunged. This wasn't just his classmates anymore. Adults in suits and scrubs were about to watch him be publicly shamed. A black 11-year-old being told, in front of professionals, to apologize for telling the truth. I don't have anything to apologize for, ma'am," he managed. A soft collective gasp rolled through the room. Some parents exchanged sharp glances. Others stared at Malik like he'd crossed an invisible line. Ms. Ellison's jaw tightened. "Excuse me? In front of our honored guests, you're going to continue this defiance?" Ryan's mother, a lawyer in a tailored gray suit, rose hesitantly. "Maybe we should hear him out," she suggested. "I appreciate your concern, Ms. Miller," Ms. Ellison replied, voice saccharine. "But classroom management is my responsibility." Her professional smile flickered, eyes turning cold again. She faced Malik. "You have 2 options, young man. You can apologize right now and rewrite your assignment with honest information. Or you can spend the rest of Career Day sitting in the office while your classmates learn from our guests. Which will it be?" Malik's throat ached. "When my dad gets here—" "Your father is not coming, Malik," she said. The sentence echoed like a slap. Parents shifted uneasily. Some students stared down at their desk. "Sweetheart," she continued, adopting a patronizing tone, "I know this is hard. The truth is, your father probably works a regular government job, maybe at Veterans Affairs, maybe doing paperwork on base. Those are perfectly respectable positions." She moved closer, lowering her voice just enough to sound intimate, but not enough that the front row couldn't hear. "You've built this fantasy because you're embarrassed," she insisted. "I understand wanting to feel special. You see Ryan's dad meeting senators. You want that same shine," she went on. Her tone softened, but somehow cut deeper. "There is no shame in being ordinary, Malik. None at all. The shame is in lying about it, especially when you come from a community that already fights stereotypes about honesty. Ms. Ellison, Ms. Miller started again. Please, I think. Sit down, Ms. Miller, the teacher said sweetly, steel beneath the sugar. The lawyer sat slowly, conflicted, her brows knitting together as she watched. Andre muttered under his breath, "This is messed up." "What was that, Andre?" Ms. Ellison demanded. "Nothing, ma'am," he said quickly. "Andre King, I heard you. Main office. Now." "But I didn't." "Now." Andre grabbed his backpack and headed for the door, shooting Malik one last look that said all the solidarity he couldn't speak aloud. Malik was alone now, alone in a room full of adults who wouldn't step in. Ms. Ellison stood over him, arms folded, waiting for his public surrender. The other parents looked away, studying their programs or their shoes, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge a veteran teacher. The clock above the whiteboard showed 9:28 a.m. According to his father's message, he'd arrive in roughly an hour. Right now, though, that might as well have been a week. Malik stared at the empty spot on his desk where his assignment used to sit before it was reduced to trash. His fingers curled around the edge of the desktop. Then, to his own surprise, he stood. "Ma'am," he said, voice quiet but steady. "My name is Malik Carter. My father is General Marcus Carter, a 4-star general in the United States Army. He served for 32 years. When he gets here, you're going to owe me an apology." Ms. Ellison's face darkened into a deep flush. "Sit down," she hissed. "No, ma'am," Malik replied. The air snapped tight. "If you do not sit this instant—" The classroom door opened abruptly. Principal Monroe stepped in, slightly out of breath, cheeks flushed, eyes scanning the room. "Ms. Ellison," she said, her tone clipped. "Hallway. Now." It wasn't phrased like a suggestion. Ms. Ellison blinked. "Principal Monroe, I'm in the middle of—" "Patricia," Monroe said sharply. Every adult in the room noticed the first name address. That never happened in public. Ms. Ellison's mouth clicked shut. She smoothed her cardigan and walked stiffly toward the door. The principal held it open and followed her out, letting it close with a soft but definitive click behind them. Through the narrow window, the students watched the two women. Monroe's expression looked deadly serious. Ms. Ellison's face shifted rapidly, from confusion to disbelief to something very close to fear. Malik sank back into his chair, heart pounding so hard he heard it in his ears. Whatever this was, it had everything to do with him. The second hand on the wall clock swept forward. 9:30 a.m. In the hallway, Monroe kept her voice low but firm. "Patricia, we have a problem," she began. Ms. Ellison crossed her arms, irritation and self-righteousness radiating. "If this is about Malik—" "I was simply enforcing expectations," she continued. "The boy was clearly—" "I just spent 20 minutes on the phone with the protocol office at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall," Monroe interrupted. The words hung between them. Ms. Ellison blinked. "Protocol office?" "Yes," Monroe said. "They called to confirm arrangements for a distinguished visitor. They needed to verify our security clearances, discuss parking for a motorcade, and ask whether we could accommodate a security detail on campus." Ms. Ellison's face went from flushed to ghost white in seconds. "A security detail," she repeated weakly. "For career day?" Monroe's mouth tightened. "For General Marcus D. Carter," she said evenly. 4-star general, Army, father of one Malik Carter, student in your classroom. The hallway seemed to tilt under Ms. Ellison's feet. Malik Carter, she echoed. Yes, Monroe said, not letting her look away. The same 11-year-old you publicly called a liar this morning. The one whose work you destroyed. The child you insisted was inventing stories because of where he lives and how his family looks. Ms. Ellison's hand flew to her mouth. I thought he was exaggerating, she stammered. He lives in that old apartment complex. His father's name wasn't on any of the usual list. No local committees, no charity galas, no newsletters. I just assumed... You assumed that real generals' children wouldn't show up in your classroom wearing hand-me-down sneakers, Monroe finished, voice icy. You assumed that because his paperwork said government employee and he wasn't on your radar, his son must be lying. Senior military officials often keep low profiles for safety, Monroe continued. They don't publish their schedules on social media. They don't advertise their families. It's literally part of national security protocol. Ms. Ellison's shoulders sagged, but Monroe wasn't done. Patricia, the protocol officer, was very clear. General Carter is en route. He will arrive with a security detail. And the first thing he asked about? She paused, letting the weight settle. Whether this would be a safe environment for his son after what happened this morning. Do you know who we're talking about, Patricia? Monroe asked, eyes narrowing. Malik Carter, the 11-year-old you just yanked out of career day in front of a room full of parents. Ms. Ellison swallowed, saying nothing. The child whose written work you tore up and dumped in the trash. The one you publicly labeled a liar. The one you told to be humble because kids from certain backgrounds shouldn't claim to be important. Her words landed like blows, each one heavier than the last. Monroe didn't soften. The boy you marched to the office, she continued, so you could keep showcasing everyone else's parents while he sat there branded as dishonest. Ms. Ellison's face tightened, but the principal kept going. The child you decided was fabricating stories about his father's service because the picture didn't fit your expectations of what a general's family looks like. The hallway hummed faintly with classroom noise, but between them, the air was razor-sharp and still, charged with something close to fury. I didn't, Ms. Ellison started, voice brittle. I thought he was exaggerating. She let out a strained laugh that died immediately. He lives in that old apartment complex off Columbia Pike. His father isn't on any community boards, no donors lists, no photos at local fundraisers. We've never seen him at PTA events. She shrugged weakly. There was nothing that suggested someone of that rank. It seemed obvious he was stretching the truth. I was trying to teach him about honesty. Yo, honesty? Monroe repeated, incredulous. You called it honesty to rip up his assignment in front of his peers? To dismiss his statement without a single phone call home? She shook her head. Patricia, you know very well that high-level military personnel frequently list government employee on school forms. It's standard. They avoid details for safety reasons. You didn't bother to consider that. You decided that because he lives in modest housing and doesn't have a last name that circulates at charity dinners, he must be lying. Monroe tapped her phone screen, the email still open. The protocol officer described General Carter as highly decorated and currently holding a critical command. They were very careful about what they said, but even their vagueness carried weight. Do you know what they asked me 3 different ways? She looked up, eyes blazing. They wanted to be absolutely certain this would be a respectful environment, because General Carter had heard something concerning from his son on the way here. He almost canceled his visit entirely. They asked if we understood the seriousness of his position. Monroe went on, voice low, if our staff was prepared to handle a visitor who arrives with security, not fanfare. And then, very quietly, they asked if Malik's teacher would be open to correction if there had been a misunderstanding. She let the phrase hang in the air. That's diplomatic language for, we heard you hurt this kid, and we're deciding how big a problem this is going to become for your school. Ms. Ellison felt the blood drain from her face. For the first time in years, she couldn't summon a neat, defensible explanation. The hallway, the fluorescent lights, even the distant chatter from nearby classrooms felt unreal, like she'd stepped sideways out of her own life. She had seen Monroe upset before, over budget cuts, over policy changes, but never like this. 15 years of working together, and she'd never heard this particular edge in the principal's voice, tight with disgust, and something that sounded like disappointment. Patricia, Monroe said, her tone roughening, in all my years as an administrator, I have never raised my voice to a teacher. Not once. We've disagreed, argued, debated. But I have never been this angry. Her volume ticked up despite her effort to contain it. You humiliated a child in public because of your assumptions about race, class, and what important families look like. You didn't just question his story. You questioned his integrity, his worth, in front of everyone he has to face tomorrow. You tore up the work he was proud of. You sent him out like a problem to be removed, while you lectured the others on humility, Monroe continued. Meanwhile, his father, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army, is literally on his way here, asking if this is a safe place for his son. She took a breath. You will apologize to Malik. You will apologize to his parents. And then we will have a very serious conversation about your future in this building. Monroe's voice, usually measured and diplomatic, carried down the corridor, sharper than Ms. Ellison had ever heard it. For 15 years, the principal had been the calm center of every storm, budget fights, angry parents, district audits. She prided herself on never losing control. But right now, standing in that hallway discussing what had been done to one black boy who told the truth, she was done being calm. And for the first time in her career, she was very intentionally, unmistakably raising her voice. I've just spent the last 30 minutes on the phone with a very polite but very insistent aide, Principal Monroe said, voice tight. I had to explain why an 11-year-old fifth grader was branded a liar for telling the truth about his father's service. Do you grasp the magnitude of that? Through the narrow hallway windows, both women noticed movement outside. 3 black SUVs rolled into the school's front loop. Men in dark suits stepped out first, moving with crisp, practiced awareness. Secret Service, Monroe wondered, or high-level military security. Either way, they swept the entrance with trained eyes, communicating silently as they spread out. Then the rear door of the center SUV opened. A tall, composed man stepped down, the sun catching the dark blue of his dress uniform. His jacket was flawless, not a wrinkle in sight. Rows of ribbons and medals lined his chest, each representing deployments, operations, sacrifices. On each shoulder, 4 gleaming silver stars caught the mid-morning light. General Marcus D. Carter had arrived. Ms. Ellison felt the strength drain from her legs. For a dizzy second, she thought she might actually collapse. "Oh my God," she whispered. He's real." "Yes, Patricia," Monroe replied, not bothering to hide the bite in her tone. "Very real. And right now, That man is walking into my school to help his son pick up the pieces of what you shattered in less than an hour." The words landed heavier than any formal reprimand. Inside room 205, the students and parents were already craning their necks toward the windows. "Is that the president?" one kid whispered. "Look at all those security people." Ryan's father, Mr. Miller, the Capitol lobbyist, stood and moved closer to the glass. His eyes widened. That's a four-star general," he breathed. The room erupted in hushed chatter. Desks creaked as students shifted, trying to see. Malik sat motionless at his seat, every muscle buzzing as he stared past their shoulders. Through the glass, he could see his father striding toward the entrance with that same steady, deliberate walk Malik had watched his whole life. Calm, controlled, like nothing could knock him off balance. Only this time, he wore full-dress uniform, stars and ribbons unmistakable. No more hiding, no more government employee boxes on forms. His dad was here, visible, undeniable. Outside, General Carter stepped through Jefferson Elementary's front doors like he was entering a briefing room, not an elementary school. His expression remained professional, eyes sweeping the hallway, taking in everything: posters, office doors, the nervous staff clustered near the main office. Per his orders, the security team stayed outside. This wasn't a military visit. This was a father coming to check on his child. Principal Monroe met him halfway down the corridor, forcing a steady smile. "General Carter, sir. I'm Principal Monroe. I'd like to apologize." He shook her hand firmly, briefly. "Principal Monroe, thank you for accommodating the short notice," he said. "I'm sorry for any disruption to your school day." His voice was level and courteous, but there was a hard edge underneath, like steel under velvet. "I understand there was some misunderstanding involving my son's writing assignment." Behind Monroe, Ms. Ellison hovered by the wall, looking like she'd been carved from chalk. General Carter's gaze slid past the principal and landed on her. Not enraged exactly, just measuring, as if evaluating a situation in the field. "You're Malik's teacher?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she stammered. General, I want to apologize. There was terrible confusion about—" "Confusion?" he repeated calmly. His tone didn't rise, but the word cut. "My son was publicly labeled a liar for accurately describing his father's service to this country. Help me understand where exactly the confusion occurred." Ms. Ellison swallowed. "Sir, I didn't know. I had no way to verify." "No," he said quietly. "You didn't verify. You assumed." The distinction dropped between them like a weight. She couldn't find an answer. General Carter continued, voice low but unflinching. "Ma'am, I've spent over 30 years leading soldiers in complicated environments. One thing I've learned: when you judge people by where they live, what they wear, or what you think their lives should look like, you're almost always wrong. And those bad assumptions, they're dangerous." He adjusted his jacket with a small practiced motion. "I've commanded units in combat. I've briefed presidents. I've made decisions that carried real human costs. But right now," he said, eyes steady on hers, "the most important thing on my agenda is checking on my 11-year-old son, who was shamed in front of his peers for telling the truth." The hallway seemed to shrink. "Where is Malik?" he asked. A few minutes later, the classroom door swung open. Principal Monroe stepped in first, her usual polished smile stretched a little too thin. "Class," she said, "we have a very special guest joining us for Career Day." Ms. Ellison followed, looking like she'd swallowed a handful of ice. Then General Marcus Carter stepped into room 205. The effect was instant. The chatter cut off so cleanly, it was like someone hit mute. Not just inside voice quiet, graveyard quiet. Every adult rose to their feet almost without thinking. Mr. Miller, who regularly rubbed shoulders with senators, straightened his spine and squared his shoulders like a new recruit. A couple of military parents in the back stiffened, eyes widening at the 4 stars. You don't see that kind of rank strolling into an elementary classroom every day. Malik saw his father, and the tight hold he'd been keeping on his emotions snapped. "Dad," he whispered. The word came out small and cracked, full of relief and everything he'd swallowed all morning. For a heartbeat, the general's professional mask slipped. His gaze locked onto his son, tear-streaked, exhausted, still sitting at that little desk. In 4 long strides, he closed the distance, protocol forgotten. He dropped to one knee beside Malik's chair and wrapped his arms around him fully, not caring who watched. "I'm here, Malik," he said softly. "I'm here. I'm sorry I got held up." Malik buried his face in the dark blue fabric of his father's uniform and sobbed, not because he was still broken, but because he'd held everything in for too long, because his father had come, because finally everyone could see what he'd been telling them was real. The embrace only lasted 10 seconds, maybe less, but in that small pocket of time, everybody in the room understood exactly what had played out earlier. A child told the truth and was punished for it. A boy tried to stand in his reality and got crushed. When General Carter straightened, he didn't let go of Malik's hand. He turned to address the room. "Good morning," he said. "I'm General Marcus Carter, United States Army. I'm sorry for interrupting your career day. But I promised my son I'd be here," he continued. "And I try very hard not to break promises to my kid." His tone never rose above normal conversation, yet every word felt heavy. He glanced briefly toward Ms. Ellison, who hovered near her desk, looking like someone had erased all the color from her face. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I understand there were some concerns about the accuracy of Malik's essay." The room collectively held its breath, waiting. Ms. Ellison opened her mouth, then shut it again. Whatever she meant to say evaporated under the weight of the moment. Principal Monroe stepped in quickly. "General Carter, if you'd like to share with the students about your work, we'd be honored," she said. He gave a single controlled nod. "Thank you." Turning back to the class, he squeezed Malik's hand once. "My son wrote that I'm a 4-star general who has served for 32 years, he said. "Every bit of that is accurate. I've led soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan," he continued. "I've served in South Korea, Germany, and at posts across the United States. Right now, I help shape operational plans that go to the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The student stared like he'd stepped out of a movie. Malik also wrote that leadership is about serving others, not yourself, the general added. He learned that from watching his mother, Dr. Renee Carter, save children's lives at Walter Reed while I was overseas, again and again. He learned it by packing up bedrooms 8 different times, the general said, by starting over at 6 schools, by celebrating holidays through video calls from tents and bases instead of around the same table. He looked slowly around the room. My son did not embellish his assignment. If anything, he left out parts that are harder to put into neat paragraphs. The truth of what military families carry is heavier than anything he could squeeze onto a single page. His eyes finally shifted back to Miss Ellison. "When a young person shares their reality with you," he said, especially when it doesn't line up with what you're used to seeing. Your first job isn't to shut them down. It's to listen, not to decide they must be lying because the truth makes you uncomfortable. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pencil drop. Ms. Ellison's voice, when it came, was barely audible. General Carter, I owe Malik an apology. A real one. She turned fully toward him, tears tracking down her cheeks. Malik, I was wrong, she said, words tumbling out. Completely, totally wrong. I made assumptions about you and your family based on things that had nothing to do with your character. I judged how you looked, where you live, what I thought your life should be, and I let that drown out your voice. She swallowed hard. I didn't listen. I didn't believe you, and I hurt you. You deserved better. So much better. She wiped her eyes, mascara smudging. You deserve to be trusted, she whispered. I am deeply, deeply sorry. Malik looked up at his father. General Carter gave him a small nod. Your call, his eyes said. Malik drew in a breath. My dad always says everybody messes up, he began. He says what really matters is what you do after. He paused, voice steadying. Maybe next time you could believe kids more, even when their stories sound too big to you. I will, Malik, Ms. Ellison said, nodding through tears. I promise I will. A few minutes later, Andre was brought back from the office. General Carter shook his hand firmly, thanking him for standing up when it wasn't easy. After the presentation, Ryan drifted over. I'm sorry I didn't say more earlier, he told Malik quietly. You were braver than me. Other classmates gathered around, not gawking this time, but with genuine respect. The dynamic in the room had shifted. Mr. Miller approached the general next. Sir, he said, I work with legislators every day. Hearing you talk about listening first, that hit home. One of the other parents, Mrs. Lopez, who cleaned federal buildings, shook the general's hand with shining eyes. Thank you for what you said, she murmured, about all kinds of service mattering. When things finally settled, Principal Monroe stepped to the front. Effective immediately, she announced, Jefferson Elementary will launch comprehensive implicit bias training for every staff member. No exceptions. What happened here this morning, she continued, will not be treated as a misunderstanding. It will be a turning point. Ms. Ellison nodded vigorously, pressing a hand to her chest. I'll be the first to sign up, she said. Then the general did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold command coin, engraved with his unit insignia. These weren't handed out lightly. He placed it gently in Ms. Ellison's palm, closing her fingers around it. I'm not giving you this because of how you treated my son earlier, he said. I'm giving it to you because you owned it. That took courage. He nodded towards the coin. Let that remind you that the biggest growth usually comes from our worst mistakes, not our best days. Ms. Ellison clutched it like a lifeline. For the next 20 minutes, General Carter talked to the class about service, leadership, and what it actually means to support a community. He answered their questions, carefully, age-appropriately, sometimes with a hint of humor that made them laugh. He made sure to highlight not just generals and politicians, but mechanics, janitors, nurses, teachers. By the end, every kid in that room felt like their family's work mattered. When he finished, Principal Monroe suggested a group photo. Students clustered around him, jostling for space. Malik stood right up front, hands still wrapped in his father's, his smile so wide it almost looked unreal. That photograph would be everywhere online within 2 days. A 4-star general kneeling among a ring of kids, one small boy beaming beside him, the story of what happened that morning spilling out in captions and threads. But in that exact moment, none of them were thinking about viral posts or news segments. It was just a son standing beside his dad, finally believed, finally vindicated, finally seen. That night, the Carters gathered in their familiar, much-discussed Arlington apartment, the same place Ms. Ellison had silently labeled too modest for a general's family, now served as the backdrop for after-dinner debrief. Renee had left the hospital early after Vincent called about the incident. She still wore her scrubs, sitting on the couch with Malik tucked tight against her side. General Carter, back in his jeans and t-shirt, sat across from them in a worn armchair. No uniform, no ribbons, just Dad. "How are you feeling, kiddo?" Renee asked softly. "Honestly," Malik said, leaning into her. "Tired, but kind of good." His father nodded. "That tracks," he said. "Big day." He studied his son's face. "What did you take away from all of it?" Malik thought for a long moment. They'd always taught him to look for meaning in hard experiences. "I learned that telling the truth can feel really lonely," he said, "especially when people don't want to hear it, but it's still worth saying anyway." Vincent's expression softened. "Yeah, what else?" he asked. Malik chewed his lip. "That people's ideas about you can be way off," he said. "They'll look at your shoes or your address and think they know everything, but that doesn't mean you should shrink to match what they expect." Renee kissed the top of his head. "That's a wise observation," she murmured. Malik glanced at his father. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. Why didn't you just tell the school what you do? Then none of this would have happened." It was a fair question, one that had been echoing in Vincent's own mind all afternoon. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Malik, your value doesn't come from my job," he said carefully. "You matter because of who you are, because you're kind, because you look out for your friends, because you stood up for yourself even when it hurt. I never wanted you to feel like you needed my rank to be important." He exhaled slowly. "But I also see now," he admitted, "that staying completely under the radar put you in a rough spot. You shouldn't have had to defend our truth alone." Malik nodded, absorbing that. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now," Vincent said, "now we make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to another kid here or anywhere we can reach." Over the next 3 months, Jefferson Elementary changed. The walls looked the same, but the culture felt different, sharper, more intentional. Every teacher and staff member completed intensive implicit bias training, not a 1-hour slideshow. Multi-session workshops, role plays, reflection exercises that made people squirm. It was mandatory. Monroe tied it directly to continued employment. They dug into racial bias, class bias, the subtle ways expectations shift based on a child's last name or zip code. They walked through real scenarios, including one that closely mirrored Malik's experience. It wasn't comfortable. Growth rarely is. But slowly, people stopped treating good instincts as unquestioned truth. Ms. Patricia Ellison attended every session, front row, notebook open. She didn't just sit quietly. She volunteered examples, asked hard questions, refused to let herself off the hook. At a faculty meeting 2 months later, she stood before her colleagues and told the story straight. "3 months ago, I hurt a student because I couldn't see past my own assumptions," she said. "I looked at Malik Carter and decided his reality was impossible, not because of evidence, because of my prejudice." Her voice didn't shake. If anything, It was stronger than it had ever sounded in that room. "I've spent these weeks unpacking biases I didn't know I carried," she continued. "I've realized a lot of what I called experience was just discrimination in professional clothing." She held up the gold command coin between her fingers. It glinted under the fluorescent lights. "I keep this on my desk every day," she said, "not as some badge of honor, but as a warning label. Every time I look at it, I remember that my biggest area of growth came from my worst mistake." The school backed up the training with policy shifts. A new protocol spelled it out clearly. When a student shared something surprising about their family, staff were to confirm details with parents or guardians first, not challenge the child publicly. No more on-the-spot interrogations. Inspired by Malik's experience, the Student Council launched the Truth and Trust Initiative, a peer system for kids to share experiences. They created spaces where students could talk about times they felt ignored, doubted, or stereotyped. Malik served as one of the founding members. He helped draft guidelines. Listen fully. No mocking, no dismissing, just hearing each other. Ms. Ellison's classroom changed too. On the first day after everything, she sat her students in a circle and asked them to help write a new class charter. Together, they crafted a statement and posted it in big letters at the front of the room. "In this classroom, we believe first and question kindly," it read. "We never assume someone is lying just because their story seems unreal. Everyone's story matters." Every student signed underneath, marker strokes overlapping. Ryan, Jasmine, Andre, and Malik right in the middle. Once a month, she hosted Family Story Circle. Kids took turns sharing about their families, jobs, journeys, struggles, victories. The point wasn't to rank who had it harder or fancier. It was to practice listening without judgment or competition. One afternoon, Jasmine talked about her mom's cleaning job in the federal buildings downtown, how she knew every corridor and office better than the people who wrote laws inside them, how staffers sometimes asked her for directions. This time, Ms. Ellison didn't rush past it. She asked questions. She honored the pride in Jasmine's voice. Another day, Andre described how his dad could diagnose car trouble just by listening to the engine, how he'd built his garage from nothing but grit. Ryan surprised people by sharing that his dad's lobbying work felt complicated now. "After meeting General Carter, I started thinking more about what service actually means," he admitted. The class really listened, and Malik, when it was his turn, spoke about military families, about the goodbyes in driveways, the new schools, the holidays celebrated over glitchy video calls. No one rolled their eyes. No one snickered. That might have been the biggest change of all. When kids spoke, others truly listened. The photo of Malik and his dad didn't stay a private keepsake for long. It hit social media, posted by a parent who'd been in the room. In the picture, General Carter knelt among a swarm of kids, 4 stars gleaming, Malik grinning like sunlight. The caption told the story, how a black student had been accused of lying about his father's service, how his essay was torn up, how he was shamed, and how a 4-star general had walked in to stand with him. Local news picked it up first. Then a regional outlet ran a feature. Within a week, it was on national broadcasts and major sites. Comment sections exploded. Some people fixated on the racial bias, others on the class assumptions. Many zeroed in on Malik's courage, on that moment when he refused to apologize for telling the truth. But what spread fastest wasn't just outrage. People were struck by the apology, the training, the visible shift at Jefferson. A rare story of harm, accountability, and growth. In a world tired of tales where the villain gets quietly shuffled aside and nothing really changes, this hit differently. Here, the teacher didn't dodge responsibility. The school didn't bury the incident. Together, they did the messy work. A few months later, invitations started appearing in Ms. Ellison's inbox. Education conferences wanted her to speak about confronting one's own bias. She accepted some, but she was careful. "I'm not the hero here," she told audiences. "I'm the warning. The system let me operate unchecked. But I'm also proof that people can change when they're willing to do the hard, humbling work." As for Malik, he wasn't the same kid who'd stood shaking at the front of room 205. He still had the same gentle heart, the same quiet humor, but there was a new steadiness in him. He co-founded a peer mentoring group where older students paired with younger ones to talk about school, home, anything. The first rule, written in big letters: believe first, question with kindness. His bond with Andre deepened. Ryan started hanging out with them at lunch, asking questions instead of making assumptions. Even Jasmine joined their little crew. They jokingly called themselves the Truth Squad, a group committed to hearing each other out. When Vincent's schedule allowed, he came to school events in normal clothes, no uniform, no ceremony. Just Malik's dad, who happened to have an intense day job. He wanted his son to know he was proud of him for his character, not his proximity to power. Renee kept working grueling shifts at Walter Reed, holding small lives in her steady hands. But she carved out time for every presentation Malik gave about military families. She sat in the front row, eyes bright, because this was bigger than one bad morning. It was about honoring invisible service. Kids holding it together while their parents moved the world. The Carters slipped back into their relatively quiet life. Jefferson Elementary, though, would never be exactly the same. And neither would anyone who heard the story. Because at the core, this was never just about stars on a shoulder or ribbons on a chest. It was about truth and who gets believed, about how easy it is to crush a kid's sense of self with a few careless words. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is stand in their truth when every signal around them says, "Sit down, stay quiet." Malik Carter had to learn that at 11. Too many kids learn it even younger. His experience in one Arlington classroom reflects something happening across America every day. Somewhere right now, a student is being told their reality doesn't count because it doesn't fit a teacher's expectations. A black boy is being written up for defiance when he speaks with the same tone a white classmate uses without consequence. A kid whose parents clean offices or fix cars is being dismissed as exaggerating. A military child is misunderstood because adults can't read the grief behind their practiced smile. And in most of those rooms, there is no four-star general walking in with a security detail to back them up. No viral photo, no news story. Just a kid absorbing the message. Your truth is inconvenient. Keep it to yourself. The numbers back this up. Federal data from the Department of Education shows black students are suspended or expelled about 3 times more often than white students for similar behavior. Most of those discipline cases involve subjective offenses like disrespect or classroom disruption. Translation? When adults have to decide whether a kid is being out of line, black children are far more likely to be punished. Another report from psychologists found that black boys as young as 10 are more likely to be seen as older, less innocent, and more threatening than white boys the same age. They're given less benefit of the doubt, fewer second chances. Their childhood gets shortened by other people's fears. Malik lived that dynamic in a single excruciating morning at Jefferson. And the damage isn't limited to detention slips or office referrals. Research shows that students who feel unheard or routinely doubted are far more likely to disengage. They stop raising their hands, stop reading aloud, stop sharing about their families. Over time, they stop believing adults will ever really see them. That's the quiet harm of bias. Not just the blow-up moments, but the slow erosion of trust. Yet Malik's story also offers something else. Proof that different outcomes are possible. He had every reason to shut down, to decide school wasn't a safe place for his voice. Instead, he chose to turn his worst day into something useful for himself and others. Ms. Ellison had every chance to dodge responsibility, to insist people misunderstood, or to pivot into self-pity. Instead, she faced her failure head-on and changed. Principal Monroe could have minimized the incident to avoid controversy. Instead, she used it as a catalyst for training, new policies, and student-led initiatives. None of that erases what happened. Malik will probably remember that hallway walk and those classroom stairs for the rest of his life. But it does show a way forward. When we acknowledge harm, when we apologize sincerely, when we change behavior and systems, we write a different ending than the usual one. So what does this mean for you, sitting wherever you are, phone or laptop in hand? It means you have more power than you think to shape what happens next. Start with questions that sting a little. When someone shares their story, especially someone whose background is very different from yours, is your first instinct to believe them or to poke holes in what they're saying? When a child tells you something surprising about their life, do you light up with curiosity or immediately look for ways it can't be true? When a situation feels off, do you speak up or stay quiet so things don't get awkward? Growth begins in those small choices. Next, do something concrete. If you're a parent, ask your child's school what kind of training teachers get around bias and equity. If they don't have any, push, politely but persistently, for change. If you're an educator, take a hard look at your own patterns. Whose behavior do you interpret as attitude first? Whose do you explain away? If you're neither, you're still part of the culture. The conversations you start, the stories you uplift, the assumptions you challenge, all matter more than you realize. When kids in your life tell you about something that happened, good or bad, practice believing them first. You can ask questions without turning into an interrogator. You can hold space for nuance without stripping them of their dignity. Remind them often that their experiences count, that they don't have to make themselves small just because their truth unsettles someone. That was the message Vincent wanted Malik to walk away with, more than anything. You were right to speak. You were right to stand. General Carter didn't show up at Jefferson Elementary to publicly humiliate a teacher or pose for cameras. He walked in because his son needed to see him walk in. Because that image, Dad in his full reality, standing beside him instead of behind the scenes, would rewrite the story in Malik's head about whether adults would fight for him. The question now isn't what happened that morning. We've covered that. The question is what we'll do with it. How we'll let it change us. Will we nod, feel sad or inspired for a moment, then slide back into old habits? Or will we actually adjust how we listen, how we discipline, how we talk about kids whose lives don't fit tidy boxes? That's the invitation inside Malik's story. It's not asking you to be perfect. It's asking you to be honest about where you might be acting like Ms. Ellison on her worst day, and brave enough to become who she started turning into afterward. If this story stirred something in you, don't just sit with it silently. Tell someone about it. Share it with a friend who teaches, a relative who works in schools, a parent who's worried their kid isn't being heard. Stories like Malik's create openings, little cracks in the armor of, "This is just how things are." Push gently at those cracks. Widen them. The more we talk about whose truth gets believed and whose gets dismissed, the harder it is for bias to hide. So here's a simple challenge. Before you close this tab and move on with your day, think back to a time when your own truth was brushed aside. When someone told you you were exaggerating or being dramatic, when you knew you were just being honest. How did that feel? How long did it stick with you? Now imagine being 11, standing alone at the front of a classroom, hearing your teacher say your story doesn't count. That's what Malik faced and survived. If you're willing, share your experience. Type it out. Say it out loud to someone you trust. There's power in naming those moments. And if this video or story is part of a channel or page you follow, go ahead and hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Whatever button helps you stay connected. Not because numbers matter, but because building a community that cares about justice, repair, and courage takes more than one voice. It takes people showing up again and again. Stories like this, about kids who refuse to fold, adults who learn late but honestly, and systems that bend instead of breaking, are what this space is for. A place where we don't just point out what's broken, but highlight what it looks like to fix it, however imperfectly. Remember, Malik wasn't extraordinary because of his dad's rank. He was extraordinary because when everything in him wanted to disappear, he said, "No, ma'am." He stood there and claimed his truth out loud. That's something every one of us can learn from, no matter how old we are or where we come from. Your experiences matter. Your perspective matters. The things you've lived through, whether anyone believed you at the time or not, have weight. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't let anyone tear up your story and toss it in the trash. If they try, tape it back together. Write it again. Say it louder. Find people who will listen. They are out there. We are out there. If Malik's journey hit you in the gut or in the heart, do 3 simple things. First, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. A teacher, a parent, a friend who's still carrying their own Malik moment. Second, ADD your voice. Have you ever been brushed aside or seen someone else's truth dismissed because of which you they were or where they came from? Talk about it. Your story can be a mirror or a flashlight for someone else who's struggling in the dark. Third, stick around, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever it looks like where you're watching or reading this. Not for algorithms, but so you don't miss the next reminder that truth, accountability, and growth are still possible. Because at the end of the day, here's what Malik Carter's story and his father's 4 stars really tell us. Your truth matters. You matter. Don't let anyone convince you that you have to shrink, lie, or stay silent just to make them comfortable. Lesson 1. Many of you have lived long enough to know how it feels when your truth is brushed aside. Malik's story reminds us that for Black children, that dismissal comes faster and hits harder. A teacher tore up his paper, not because he lied, but because his life didn't match her picture of important people. At our age, we know how deeply that kind of wound can cut and how long it can last. Lesson 2. Yet we also saw courage. An 11-year-old boy stood his ground, and a father with 4 stars on his shoulders walked into that classroom not for glory, but to stand beside his son. The school faced its failure instead of hiding it, and real change began. Training, new rules, new habits of listening. Lesson 3. For those of us in our 60s, this is our call. We helped fight earlier battles for dignity. Now we can use our voices, our votes, and our stories to insist that every child's truth is heard the first time, without needing a uniformed hero to prove it real. Friends, when you think about Malik standing in that classroom, does it bring back a time when your own truth, or a child's you love, was doubted or dismissed? How did you handle it then? And what do you wish you had done differently? I'd be honored if you'd share your stories in the comments so others can learn from your wisdom. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories and lessons that can help us guide the next generation.